Okay, hello everyone. All right, now in the last video about declaring variables, we declared these variables, right? Now in this video, let's talk about initializing these variables. We have declared them, we've told the computer to create a space in its memory. We've given them names, and we've specified that, okay, these variables should be only allowed to store the kind of data that we declared them to have. So in this case, we declared my first short to allow data of type short to be stored in there, right? That's what we've done. Now we need to give them values. We've created a space. Now we can store values in those spaces, right? Or in these variables, so we can use them. Okay, we can in the future tell the computer to display what's stored in that value. We can tell the computer to take what's stored in that value and add it to something else and display it to us. We can do all sorts of things with it. But now let's talk about initializing them. Once you declare the type, you don't have to declare the type again. You declared it once and said, okay, this variable is of type byte, meaning it can only store bytes. For example, this can only store characters, right, or a char, right, or pretty much a character. And so let's try initializing them. To initialize them, let's talk more about the process. So my first byte, okay, has been declared, but it doesn't have a value. And so to initialize them, we use the name, okay, of the variable, my first byte, and an equal sign, and we give it a value. So my first byte is declared, okay, with type byte, meaning it has a range, right? So let's store, meaning it can only store a data of type byte in there, right? And so let's give it a value of, let's say, 4, which is in the range of a byte. Yes, right? And so, and you terminate it, okay? Now we can come here, system.out.print. Oops, I forgot my S here. System.out.println, and display what's stored in my first byte. Okay. Now, when you declare a variable, nothing happens. When you run your program and you declare a variable, nothing happens. It only happens behind the scenes, because nothing is going to be displayed on the screen. With this, we are saying, okay, display this on the screen, and so this is the only thing that's going to be displayed on the screen. When you initialize a variable, also nothing happens on the screen. Like, it happens behind the scenes. This happens in the computer, but it's not really displayed to us. This over here, we are saying print the content of my first byte, and that's the only thing we're going to see. And so we are not going to see all of this stuff. This is all happening, it's processing, all happening behind the scenes. And so when I compile this, okay, I need to save it. All right, so yes, I compiled it, right, and I run it, and it displays that my first byte now holds 4. Okay, so let's talk more about this. So anytime I write a statement like this, I'm assigning what's on the right. Okay, this equal sign is the assignment operator. Okay, it's an assignment operator, and these are the operands. My first byte, what's on the left, and 4 are the operands. But this is the assignment operator, and it's assigning what's on the right to what's on the left, not the other way around. So if you try to do something like this, 4 is equal to my first byte, it wouldn't work. You see, in math, sometimes you can say x is equal to 4 or 4 is equal to x, and it's the same thing. But in programming, if you try to do something like this, it wouldn't work. It always has to be this way, where you are assigning the value. The value is what's on the right to what's on the left. Okay. Now over here, you can for example, you can type in an expression, and all that matters is that it has to evaluate to a value that can be stored in the variable. For example, instead of using 4, you can use something like this. You can say 4 plus 4, right? And it's going to evaluate this and then store the results in my first byte. And so when I compile this, save before, right, and I run it, now it says 8. And so the value here, it just has to be. It can be a statement. It can be an expression. The only thing is it has to evaluate to a value, okay, that can be stored in the variable. Okay. So now let's try to store something in short, right? And all we have to do is use the name of the variable. I'm just going to copy it. So I'll say my first short now is equal to, let's say, 600. Okay, and we'll see if we'll have an error if it's not in the range. And so we'll try that. And then, hold on a second. And so I don't want to, you can use multiple statements or you can concatenate, remember, but we are dealing with numbers, so I don't want to add it. And so let's just use a couple of print statements, okay? As a matter of fact, let's just use one print statement so that we get used to using one print statement. Okay, so I'm concatenating the first value with a space, right? And then hold on one second. And so over here, I'm going to type in the value, right, of my first byte. Oh, let's just even use the actual name of my first byte is right, and then let's concatenate it with the value with the variable itself, and it's going to basically display the value. And so when I compile this and I run it, it says the value of my first byte is 8. Now remember we talked about the new line character, so I'm going to concatenate the new line character \n, right, and I continue from here, and I'm going to say the same thing, right, the value of my first shot is, and then I'm going to concatenate it with the variable itself, which is my first shot, because I have initialized it. I've initialized my first shot here. Compile this, run it, and now we see 2 lines. The value of my first byte is 8, the value of my first shot is 600. Okay, so one print statement, we're using it to do all of this. We talked about this in the previous video. So I'm concatenating it with another new line character \n. I can break it somewhere around here, remember? You can't just break a string, you have to concatenate it before. So I concatenate, I break it on the next line and continue. Same line, but I've just broken it into 2. It's just the same line. All right, now we can say, we haven't initialized number yet, right? If we try to print out the content of number, let's see what happens. And we can say the value of number, all right, is, so let's concatenate it to number, the value of number. If we try to do that, because it hasn't been initialized, when I compile it, it gives me an error and says variable number might not have been initialized, right? Meaning we haven't given it a value. It's empty. And so we can come here and say number is equal to 6, right? Number is an integer, so 6 is in the range of that. So compile that, and now it doesn't give us any errors. And when we run it, it says now the value of number is 6. So let's continue. Let's initialize my first long, right? So my first long, right, is going to be equal to, remember, any number you type, any integer literal you type is seen as an integer, and so you have to type in the L literal to show that that number is a long. Remember we talked about this when we were talking about longs. And so let's concatenate this with a new line character and say that the value of my first long is, and then let's concatenate it with my first long variable we just initialize here, right? Compile this, run it, and the value of my first long is this number. Okay, let's do it for all of them so we can see it. So let's concatenate it with a new line character, and we can continue here, but then we can break it here, right? Because there's a plus sign here. We concatenate it with another string. There's a plus sign here, so we can break it. We can break it here. You can't just break it somewhere around here. You can't just do this and continue. You can't. You have to make sure that you concatenate it with whatever you're going to type on the next line. So I'm concatenating it with something I'm going to type on the next line, which is what I've broken, which is this. I'm concatenating it with something I'm going to type on the next line. And so the value of my first float is, I haven't initialized the value yet of my first float. So I'm going to copy it down here and say my first float is equal to floating points. Now I can say 5.6 terminated, and then now it has a value, so I can concatenate the value of it, my first float. I can either type it or I can make a copy of it here. Right, compile this. Oops, I have an error. Now it says possible loss of precision. Now remember that anytime, okay, so this is good. Remember anytime we type in a floating point literal, we talked about this too. Java sees it as a double. although 5.6 can fit I'm assuming, although the number you are typing here may be able to fit in the float, right? Because we declared my first float as a float, right? Although the number may be able to fit in there sometimes, right? Java sees it as a double first, and it's complaining because it's saying that you can't store a double in the float. And so in order to specify that this is a float, okay, you have to type in the literal F to tell that this number, okay, to tell Java that Java don't always see floating point numbers as doubles. This is a float, right? You have to do that to tell Java that, because it always sees floating point literals that you type in your program as doubles. So compile this, and now it works. When I run it, now it says the value of first float is 5.6. Concatenate it with a new line character, right? And now let's talk about the double, right? Double. The value of my money, let's use a big number, is, let's concatenate it with my money, which hasn't been declared yet, right? I mean, sorry, it's been declared over here, but it hasn't been initialized. And so let's initialize money to be equal to, let's say, 5.6 million. 5.6 million. Okay, and remember, we don't have to type in commas here. Okay, if it's 5.6 million, you don't have to type in commas here. We talked about this too. And so the value of my money is my money. Compile this and run it. Now it says the value of my money is that, right? We'll learn more about formatting numbers later on, but for now, just know how to declare variables and initialize them. Notice we are declaring variables on separately, and we are initializing variables separately. We'll talk more about how to do them together, but for now, just learn the first part first, how to do them separately, and then we'll get better, and then we'll do them on one line. Okay, and so we are left with letter and is raining. Okay, now let's continue concatenating with a new line character. I can break it here, right? Because you can't just break it, in the middle of a string here. You have to concatenate it with. You have to concatenate, right? You can't just, for example, break it in between this like that. You can't, and just continue. You have to concatenate it first. Concatenate it first with what you're going to type on the next line. And so now we say the value of letter. We know letter can only store characters, right? It's a single character surrounded with single quote or single quotations. And so the value of letter is, now let's concatenate it with letter, which hasn't been initialized. And so now let's initialize letter to, remember, it's a char variable, and it can only store single characters, right? Surrounded with single quotations. So I can store C here. And now let's do the last one, which is a boolean. So plus, or concatenate, not plus. Let's concatenate this with a new line character and say that the value of is raining is, and then now let's concatenate it with is raining. Now I'm doing it the other way around, but it doesn't matter. You can actually declare it before you do this too. Same thing. Although I've done this, if I run this program, I'm going to get an error. But because I haven't run it yet, compiled and run it yet, I'm not getting an error. But all that matters is I initialize it before I run it, right? Because over here I'm trying to use it without initializing it. When I run this, I'm using is raining without giving it a value. When I compile this, it's telling me variable is raining might not have been initialized. Okay, so now I'm going to initialize it. I'm going to initialize is raining here and set it to, remember, is raining is a boolean. You can only store true or false, small caps, right? So I mean lowercase, and so I'm going to store true in there, right? And then compile and then run, and then now it says the value of is raining is true. Now if you come here and change the values, let's say I change this from 4 plus 4, let's say to 70 or byte, let's store 7 in there. Change my first short to 630. Change number to 8. My first long, let's change some of the values here to, let's say, 5, 6. Let's change it to 6. My first float, let's change it to 8.6. My money, let's change it to 76. Change its character to a small letter Z. It's raining, let's change it to false. Compile this, and we run it, we can see that the values also change with it. This rating has been changed to false and everything else. All right, so this is how to initialize variables. Okay, we'll talk more about how to join these two on the same line, and how to even more helpful ways to even declare and initialize your variables. All right, so if you have any questions, please comment down below and I'll do everything to respond to them. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time with the next video. All right then, bye-bye.